Now, The Hunt Palmer Show.
Boy, does it smell good.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Rouse's Supermarkets on 104.5 ESPN, Baton Rouge.
That's good.
Live from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio, this is Hunt Palmer.
Welcome in. Hunt Palmer not coming to you from Mercedes-Benz at Baton Rouge studio downtown in the capital city. Instead, right here on Radio Row in New Orleans for Super Bowl 59. We're brought to you by LeBear's Baton Rouge. Appreciate them for making this possible. Got Jacob Beck and Cassie Spazzali back there in the studio on the ones and twos. And as you might guess, we got a lot to do over the next 2 hours. Brooke Choulet is going to join us coming up in 15 minutes. She is a sports psychiatrist. Very interested to see what she's got to say. She does a lot of work with the Phoenix Suns and the different players associations around American professional sports. So we'll chat with her in 15 minutes. Adam Devine. Yeah, that one. He of a few things that you've probably seen, Pitch Perfect being one, of course, and you've got, of course, I'm blanking on the Comedy Central show where he plays the guys. Workaholics. There it is. There it is. He's Workaholics as well. I'm going to get him to stop by here in 30 minutes. Excited for that conversation. Lorenzo Neal, all-time NFL great at fullback, and the guy who was the Chargers fullback until Hester showed up is going to be here at 2 o'clock. Ricky Cobb from Outkick, who runs a great social media account on Twitter from 70s Sports, and he's a really funny guy that we'll get a chance to talk to in the second hour. Brian Kelly met with the media yesterday. We'll do that as well. So plenty to do here on this Thursday. Of course, our Thursday show is brought to you by Rouse's Markets. We'll start now the same way we start every single day, and that's with our Genesis opening drive.
It's time for Hunt's Opening Drive, presented by Genesis of Baton Rouge.
Unfortunately, we're not going to have a ton of fun for the first 10 minutes of the show because we are going to talk about the basketball team. I'm confident the morning show didn't do that at all, and I feel like there's a chance that Matt may not talk about the basketball team because there's not a lot to talk about after their last two outings, but we're going to spend the first 10 minutes on it, and then we'll move right along. Last night, LSU smoked in Athens. 81-62 was the final. Cade with the appropriate sound bar there. It was a disaster, and I think a lot of people have one thing that stood out to them about this game. You looked at LSU in the first half, and they were just throwing up threes from everywhere. Everywhere. And that's not something they've been good at. In fact, they're the worst three-point shooting team in the Southeastern Conference. We talked about it last week. They were the fourth worst shooting team from three-point range in the Power 5 conferences. And so what do? They go to Athens, Georgia, and in the first half, of their first 24 shots, 21 of them were threes. Just throwing up threes from everywhere. And they actually made some of them, which I didn't see coming, quite frankly. They buried 4 of their first 6. But even so, making some shots early in the game, you still didn't have a lead. Because of the real culprit in this game. The real culprit in this game was LSU's defense, which has now betrayed it 2 games in a row. So you can point to the fact that a bad three-point shooting team shot a ton of threes, and yeah, that's probably not a great way to go about business. I likened it on LouisianaSports.net to Les Miles' teams spreading it out 5 wide and throwing it 56 times, or Skip Bertman's team trying to shoot balls through the right side or maybe do a little bunting. You just play to a weakness, and that's what LSU appeared to do, but that's not the issue. It's not the 3-ball. It's the defense. Georgia entered this game as an offense without an identity. They entered this game averaging 66 points per game in league play. They entered this game 27% from the three-point line in league play. That was worst in the SEC in league games. And you allowed that Georgia team to score 81 points. That is unacceptable. Georgia has at no point shown they were capable of being that kind of offense. And you go back to Saturday against Texas. You allowed Texas to run up more points against you than against anyone since a mid-December game against UNO. LSU has shot the ball poorly a lot of the year. LSU has rebounded poorly a lot of the year. LSU has turned the ball over the entire year. But they stayed in games and won some games because their first shot defense was good. That has now fractured. It was terrible on Saturday, and it was terrible again on Wednesday. And I think one of the laziest takes that you can have as a commentator, as a fan, as someone who's analyzed, one of the laziest takes you can have when someone gets beat is, they came out flat. Came out flat. Didn't want it. Lack of effort. I think oftentimes that's a lazy take because I think it sometimes is thought of as an excuse for a team that just got beat. So it takes a lot for me to question effort, to question it. I'm not declaring that LSU has quit. I am not doing that. But when I look at this box score and I look at a Georgia team that got whatever it wanted on the offensive end of the floor, sometimes that's about effort. When I look at the rebounding margin that LSU lost by 20 in this game, you can think about effort. And when you're on the offensive end of the floor, what's the easy thing to do? It's not to move the ball and penetrate and kick. It's not to drive to the bucket. The easy thing to do is just pull up and shoot a three. And LSU did a lot of that. A lot of that. And so you start to ball all these three things up, and it just stands to reason that you would question whether or not this team remains locked in. Look, 1-7 is a tough place to be. 1-8 is a tougher place to be. These guys, in their post-game press conferences, which I have been to, have praised their team unity, cohesion, team chemistry, all of that throughout the early parts of these SEC struggles. But when you're turning the ball over, you're not rebounding, you're not defending, and you're taking the easiest shot on the floor, you can start to look at that and go, is that 100%? I can't speak to it. I'm not out there. I'm just watching. And I don't use the Q word very often, and I'm not going to use it today in terms of declaring that LSU has waved a white flag. I'm not there. I think they're an overmatched team that understands the position they're in. They've played two very, very bad games, and we'll let the rest of the season dictate whether or not these guys are going to be locked in. Because you understand you're in a different era now. And how much does that purple and gold really mean to everybody in that locker room? I don't know. It may mean everything. Cam Carter said that. Some of the guys, that have transferred in from lower levels, maybe this is a big, big deal to them, and I'm just completely off base. I'm leaving the door open for that. But you realize that a lot of them are one-year guys, two-year guys, maybe guys who have been at LSU but aren't planning on being at LSU next year. Like, how much does it mean? There was a time where you could say that it really did. I don't know that you can speak to that quite as eloquently like right now. And when you get dusted by two teams who were under 500 in league play, the way that LSU has been thoroughly dusted their last two times out, man, you open the door to a lot of discussion. A lot of discussion. And last night was really, really disheartening. You look at some of the statistics that were staggering. Georgia won paint points in this game 44-14. They beat LSU in the paint by 30 points. LSU did not have a 2-point field goal for the first 18 minutes of game time. 18 minutes without making a two. That is really, really hard to do. Now, maybe it was in the plan to shoot a bunch of threes, because it's not like LSU was getting twos whenever they wanted them. LSU was 4 of 15 on layups in this game. 4 of 15 on layups. And this, to me, is a bit of an effort stat here. Jordan Sears, Cam Carter, and Jai Bailey, LSU's starting backcourt. They combined for 4 rebounds in 89 minutes. 4 rebounds in 89 minutes. Blue Kane, a Georgia guard, had 10 in 30. It's bad. It is really, really bad. And it doesn't bring me any joy whatsoever to sit here and talk about this. I hate it. I hate it for Matt McMahon. I hate it for the players. I hate it for the fan base. I like watching that team play basketball, and right now the last 2 products they put out there have been unwatchable. And it's just, I pointed to this earlier this week on Monday's show, so we're not going to relitigate everything that we talked about on Monday. I made my point. It was clear. I think it's going to be difficult to reverse this complete halt in momentum. I think it's going to be difficult to ratchet it back up in the offseason or into next year. I really do. And I made that clear on Monday. But this is the 2024-25 team we're talking about here. And if we can just put the program talk aside and just talk about this team, this is a slippery slope because now you've lost 5 in a row. And now they probably didn't get into Baton Rouge until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. You've lost a night of sleep. It's Thursday. You got to try to catch up on some sleep. You've got a top 15 team coming in for a quick turnaround on Saturday, and that matchup is awful, and it just doesn't feel like there's a halt to this thing in sight. And last night was really disheartening because Georgia's not very good. They played well at home, and you see the bracketology, and it looks like they're potentially, a 11 seed or something. It's not a great team, and they absolutely outclassed LSU. And maybe that's because of talent, maybe that's because of preparation, maybe that's because of execution, or maybe it's a lack of effort. I'm not ready to declare which side of the fence I'm on today. I'm opening the door, though. Because every single metric you can point to for hustling, which does not point to everything, but all the metrics are painting a pretty bleak picture. It's a huge bummer. But hey, I've got a piece up on LouisianaSports.net right now previewing relief pitching, and we'll talk some baseball a little later. And we're 8 days from first pitch, so that's kind of the way things go down here in Baton Rouge. We're here on Radio Row with Super Bowl 59. Super Bowl 59. There it is. Not 49. They already had 50. Super Bowl 59, and had them blast all week long. It's been a ton of fun. Appreciate LeBear's Baton Rouge for making it possibility. We've got a lot to do over the next 30 minutes. Couple of guests coming in. Adam Devine, comedian, actor, going to be with us in about 15 minutes. We'll take a time out. Brooke Choulet, who is a sports psychiatrist, is going to be with us coming up next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge, genesisofbatonrouge.com is the website. Every car that is on the lot is online at genesisofbatonrouge.com. When I say Genesis of Baton Rouge, you should think luxury. But when I say that and you think luxury, don't think, well, I can't afford it. You'd be surprised. Genesis model is luxury vehicle at a reasonable price. Get on by and work with their team over there at Genesis of Baton Rouge. Hang out with their brand ambassadors. Get behind the wheel of one of their fantastic vehicles, and you'll see the difference. You'll understand how sleek and stylish and comfortable these cars are. Never been by the dealership. It's on Airline at PQ across from Women's Hospital. Fairly new, just 2 years in that location. Get on by and see them. It's Genesis of Baton Rouge, and you can find them online at genesisofbatonrouge.com.
The Hunt Palmer Show, live from Super Bowl 59 Radio Row in New Orleans. Presented by L'Auberge Casino Hotel, Baton Rouge.
We're here on Radio Row, Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans, brought to you by LeBear's Baton Rouge. Walked in today. We all have heard us say this all week, but the intensity has gone up and up and up each and every day. And today is even greater than it was yesterday, and I'm anticipating that tomorrow will be greater than today. I walked in to the big media room, which is just absolutely massive today. And the first two people I saw kind of in walking from the door to the set were Lawrence Taylor and Joe Montana. I was just like, well, that's two of the 5 best players who have ever played football before right here. And we're hanging out. The USA Today folks are right next to us, and they do a pretty good job of booking guests, I must say. Joe Burrow stopped on by. We made an effort. He was all booked up. Stephen A. Smith just got up from his chair right there with USA Today. So lots and lots of folks out and about today. Malik Neighbors is in. Jake's going to get him with the SiriusXM crew coming up here today, and you'll maybe hear some of that on tomorrow's OTB. So that's great for us from a local perspective. And so there's a lot going on here, as you might imagine. I kind of run through the guest list that we're going to have today, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have Brooke here shortly. Adam Devine is going to join us. Adam Devine, actually from Pitch Perfect, from Workaholics, spent some time in Baton Rouge filming Pitch Perfect. So want to get some of his thoughts on filming on LSU's campus. He's also was raised in Omaha. I'm curious if he'll have any realization of how big a deal Omaha is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My guess is no, but we'll see. We'll talk to him coming up in a few minutes. I've made Hester jealous. I don't get to make Jacob Hester jealous very often. That's not something that I can do a ton of, but I do today because I get Lorenzo Neal at 2 o'clock. 16 years as a fullback in the NFL, so we'll talk to Lo Neal coming up. Brian Kelly met with the media yesterday. I thought had some pretty interesting things to say on the roster side of things. We'll get into some of that sound. But while we're here right now, I just want to we'll kind of address the situation that Brian Kelly felt necessary to address yesterday when he initially met with the media. Before he got into the purpose of the press conference, as he described it, which was to talk about the transfer portal ads and the new staff additions, he felt it necessary to address the Greg Brooks story on Good Morning America. I can't imagine many of y'all missed that story. But if you did, Greg Brooks and his father were on Good Morning America with Michael Strahan in a taped segment, and they spoke about Greg's situation from being a defensive back at LSU to the symptoms that he was undergoing to eventually the diagnosis and the brain cancer and the surgery to remove it, and then the recovery and the road that he's been on since. And while, as I mentioned yesterday, none of what was in the Good Morning America interview was completely earth-shattering from a new factual perspective. It was just shedding more light on Greg's current situation by showing video of him in his day-to-day life, and then obviously the Q&A portion where Greg is compromised in his speech. He's compromised with his motor skills. He's in a wheelchair, and his speech is compromised as well. And so that was something that you could read about but didn't see until Good Morning America took the opportunity to sit down with him. But the big quote that came out from that sit-down was Greg Brooks Sr., father of Greg Brooks, saying that they had not heard from anyone in LSU's football department since October of 2023, just after the diagnosis, especially Brian Kelly. And then Greg Brooks Sr. went on to say, like, hey, man, why couldn't you just pick up the phone, tell my kid you love him, like he's a player on your team? And the inference that I certainly made was, like, Brian Kelly never spoke to Greg Brooks again once he had brain surgery. And I mean, how would I know? I'm not there with Brian Kelly. I wasn't there with Greg Brooks. We're just listening to what is being said. And Brian Kelly immediately went to the mic before he made any sort of statement about the transfer portal class or took a single question. He went to the podium and said, look, like, I want to address something that is categorically false. I was present during Greg's recovery. I was there multiple times, and someone within LSU's football department was there nearly every single day. And he said that the statement touched a nerve with him. And that is interesting. We're not, I don't think, going to learn any facts from it, and I'm not here to really draw any further conclusions from that. I'm just here to say that it's interesting that one party suggests one thing vehemently and the other party completely disagrees. This is not ancient history. This is not something that you would have forgotten about at this point. Certainly, Greg's word, Greg Jr.'s word may be tough to take when when he's under the medical care that he is and going through the intense surgeries and recovery that he did. But the family, I would think, would have a reasonable understanding of how often Brian Kelly and/or members of the LSU football staff were at the hospital in the most trying days of their life. So that, to me, is interesting. And again, I'm not here to say this person is right, to say that person is right, because there's no way for me to know. But it is interesting to bring up. And Brian Kelly said, look, you can criticize me as a coach. You can criticize the plays that we call. You can criticize the recruits that we bring in. You can criticize the results on the field. But once you come off the field, that line is drawn very clearly. And he felt like his character was under attack. He felt like his relationships with his players were under the microscope and being questioned. And he felt it necessary to come out and make a very, very strong statement, and he did. So I'm curious if there's going to be a follow-up. Now, I'll tell you all this from a journalistic perspective because I'm dipping my toe back into those waters now with LouisianaSports.net and doing a little bit of, I would hesitate to call it reporting on a day-to-day basis. We were the first ones to write a story online about Omar the Tiger coming, which is not exactly hard-hitting news, but we had that up on the website. And there's a bit of me that is trying to find out some information here and there about some things. But I'll tell you all this, if you're looking for some sort of further development on that. LSU football is pretty reserved with off-season headlines and press conferences. Spring football's coming up in a month, and Brian Kelly will meet with the media from time to time there. If you're going to hear something further on this issue, then it's going to come from Greg Brooks' camp. And I'm not sure who's in position or desires to ask that question or wants a comment or a rebuttal to what Brian Kelly had to say. But I think you've probably heard the end of it from LSU's side, unless Brian Kelly feels like he's under attack once again and feels the need to, quote unquote, and I use that term fairly lightly, defend himself from this, what he would determine as categorically false claim. So I found that to be, it's not often, and look, I choose to live in a world surrounded by sports. I'm about to talk to an actor and comedian about goofy stuff in sports, and that's the world that I've chosen to live in. It's the world I'm interested in. I don't like politics. I don't like drama. Hard news is not necessarily my favorite thing in the world. I don't love turning on a lot of the news networks, whether national, internet, whatever the case may be. I don't love talking about that kind of stuff. As little fun as talking about the basketball team shooting 1,000,000 threes yesterday is because they played poorly and lost. I don't like dabbling in real life stuff, especially when you deal with the situation like one that Greg Brooks Jr. is in right now. But it is relevant, and it is something that I felt the need to bring up and talk about here on this show. We're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but to completely sweep that under the rug, I think would have been misguided on our part. So you look at it, it's a horrible situation any way you look at it, because what's truly not as important as who visited the hospital on what day for how many hours under whose watch and who remembers what really matters is that Greg Brooks is going through such a very, very difficult time in his life, and no young person should have to deal with that. And that's something that Greg is still recovering from and dealing with every single day. And that's the most important thing. So you can get caught up in the back and forth into who was doing what and who said what and who was responsible for what. And that's all something the court system will deal with and something that we'll cover as it becomes relevant. But it's just, to me, as I look at it from 30,000 feet, okay, that's a new quote we need to address. But also at the same time, it's just a horrible situation for a young person to have to deal with the things that Greg Brooks is dealing with. So certainly my best and our best here to him as he continues to recover, and hopefully he can move forward as well as humanly possible. We're here on Radio Row here for Super Bowl 59, brought to you by LeBear's Baton Rouge. And we got a ton to do over the next 90 minutes. It's a who's who of the football world around here, and sometimes that involves celebrities as well. So we'll try to catch up with one of those when we come back. It's, of course, a Thursday edition of The Hunt Palmer Show presented by Rouse's.
The Hunt Palmer Show. You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Rouse's Supermarkets.
Rolling along here on this Thursday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show. We're brought to you by Rouse's Markets. It's kind of like herding cats around here. You never quite know who you're going to get in the next segment. We're thrilled. We've got Brooke Choulet, who is a sports psychiatrist, joining us here. Brooke, thanks so much for your time. How are you?
Good. This is my first time in New Orleans, so I'm enjoying it. Yes.
Well, tell us about what you've enjoyed. Have you gotten out to see some restaurants? Have you been down to the French Quarter? What have you enjoyed?
Well, I got here last night.
Okay.
And it's been great just to go around Radio Row. It's my first year here doing this, so just an experience.
It's our first time on Radio Row as well. We're local down Baton Rouge, so we're driving in and out from an hour, and it's been crazy. Just kind of I was telling my audience a little bit earlier, like I walked in and the first two people I saw in this room were Lawrence Taylor and Joe Montana, who are like the two of the 5 greatest players who have ever played the sport. And there's just a lot of people here with a lot of great stories. So give us a little bit of your background. I know you're in sports psychiatry. You're based out of Arizona. I've worked with the Suns and some of the PAs around American sports, but a little bit of your background.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a concierge sports psychiatrist, meaning I'll go to wherever the athlete needs me, whether that's on site at the practice facility, traveling with a team like I did in the NBA for a few years, really just wherever people need me. So I really provide treatment for depression, anxiety, ADHD, and then just general life stuff, right? So like transition after sport, injury during your sport, all those different pieces that can really tear at an athlete's identity. When
I think about that, my brain immediately goes to like social media and like dealing with fame. Is that a lot of what you do? I mean, I'm just speculating, but that's where my brain would immediately go.
A lot of times it's setting good boundaries with people around you, right? So as an athlete, their salaries are public online oftentimes, their families coming out of the woodworks, expecting things from them. So really just giving that player permission to say no to the people around them and interpreting that not as mean, but as boundary setting.
We do something at Guarantee where I work, where we have a personality test, and it helps us to kind of relate to people in the building. I'm what is called a 9 by this metric, and I'm very non-confrontational. I go with the flow. My flaw is I don't take things seriously enough, so I struggle with people who are focused on everything, and that's hard to deal with. I have to pick myself up a little bit and pay attention a little bit more. So it's hard for me to even understand how much these athletes that you're working with are going through with the fame, with the public spotlight, and all those things that are going on, because I'm just kind of I kind of go with the flow. What is, do you think, the most difficult part of what they have to do day in and day out?
I think that mental toughness, right? And really grit is defined by passion plus perseverance. And so everyone that enters the league has a physical skill, right? They've all gotten there because they're good at their sport. But what sets apart those great players from the rest, I would argue it's the mental kind of mindset side of things.
Is there anything you do on the playing surface, whether it's the basketball court or the football field or whatever it may be, or are you purely kind of focusing on life when you get away from practice and games?
Oh, we focus on court stuff, especially those that have imposter syndrome, right? Like, I don't deserve to be here. I'm not as good as the people around me, which is, I know you're laughing because it's we don't see that, right? We're like, oh my gosh, they're so incredible. But imagine losing a game-winning shot, right? And then you get in the locker room, you get to your phone, and not only are you upset with yourself, but then social media is blowing up at you too.
That's the part that I think, and I mean, how, every case is different, obviously, but how plugged in do you think most athletes are to the social media? I think it's so toxic. Again, I can kind of dismiss, I don't get much hate. Trust me, I don't have enough followers to get that. But I can dismiss Joe Internet Guy really easily. But they got millions of people that are doing it. You miss a free throw, you miss a shot, you drop a ball. How locked in are those guys to that?
A lot of them have social media managers where they will just delegate that to the manager and they don't even look. They don't even want to look. And then you have the guys or women that are really excellent at detaching from everyone around them, which is what I encourage people to do. I don't care if someone gives you a compliment, said that was the best shot, you had the best game of your life, or you suck and you should never get on the field again. Neither of those should actually waver your own self-worth, because that should be self-defined.
And, I mean, it's crazy because even walking around this room, I see people that, to me, look larger than life. I mean, Joe Burrow just walked by here. We're in Baton Rouge. He's an LSU guy. I mean, he's the greatest player who's ever played at LSU. But I know people that know Joe. Jacob Hester, who's on our morning show, played in the NFL. He knows Joe really well. It's like, yeah, he just likes to play video games, and he's just really good at playing quarterback. Sometimes it's hard for us to kind of look at these guys and women as kind of just like us, but in a sense you do that every single day.
Right, and I make the analogy of a pie with 8 slices. Is the athlete that's in trouble is the one that sees their sport as 7 to 8 of those slices, right? Because then the second day of a season-ending injury, their whole identity is shattered, and now you're at risk for depression, anxiety, all those other things. So like you said, building in those other things you enjoy, whether it's video games, travel, spending time with friends, so that you can have some other pieces of the pie as well.
I feel like the mental health side of things is fairly new. I use air quotes there because I don't think anybody was doing that in the 70s. So, like, are there former athletes that you've worked with that didn't have necessarily access to some of this, whether it was on their team or that they knew they could reach out to? They're like, man, if I would have had that back in my time, that would have been completely different.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of veterans on teams that are still playing go through that, where now most colleges, NCAA has requirements of mental health services that have to be provided.
Okay.
So the guys that go into the league from college are used to having sports psychology and sports psychiatry on site, whereas the older guys in the NBA, NFL, they're like, oh, that's new. Like, you don't have to talk to that person. And so it's different.
I mean, I got to imagine those folks that you're talking about are in their 30s, mid-30s. So that's, I mean, how new are we talking about having full-time staff for college and for the professional ranks?
I want to say 2019 or 2020 is when the NBA required a consulting psychiatrist.
That's not that long ago.
I know, and I think the NFL was around the same time. NCAA, I believe, was a few years ago as well. So it is newer to have it as a requirement, but now I'd like to see it even one step further, and that it's actually a utilized requirement. And I actually just put out a op-ed in Sports Business Journal called More Than Just a Checkbox, because mental health services should be more than just a checkbox. It should be seen as important as the physical strength training.
I know you've got a couple things going on as we get closer to the Super Bowl here in New Orleans. Can you tell us about them?
Sure. So tomorrow is the NFLPA Be Well event, which is an event held for clinicians, which is really interesting. So no public, and I'll be moderating a panel with 2 former and 2 active players. And then on Saturday at the Lee Steinberg Super Bowl party, there's a Brain Health Summit element. So it's a 6-hour-long party, but the first 2 hours are 2 panels back-to-back about brain health. So I'll be moderating the health innovation panel. Now,
how much of brain health are we talking, like just your mental and your attitude, like we've been talking about, and how much of it is the CTE elephant in the room that the NFL is certainly dealing with?
A bit of that too. One of our speakers on the panel is I believe she's the director of concussion at University of Missouri Columbia. Okay. So we'll have some good people there. Awesome. We'll enjoy New Orleans. Best of luck with all of that, and we appreciate a little bit of time today. Thanks. Appreciate you. That is Brooke Choulet, MD. She is with Concierge Performance Psychiatry, works with a various number of professional athletes throughout the country, and we appreciate a little bit of her time. We'll take a timeout. When we come back, see if we can chat with Adam Levine. That'll be next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
OneBathAndClosets.com is the website. David Duvall and his team, 30 years of redesigning and remodeling bathrooms and closets. I had an awesome conversation earlier today with David Duvall. We had some breakfast and just talking about some of the awesome things that they're doing right now at One Bath and Closets. And one of the things that's important to realize is that David and his team are locally owned. You want to do business with someone local here in South Louisiana in the Baton Rouge area, and David is certainly that. He offers a lifetime warranty on his work. If you're someone who's got fiberglass that you can't clean in the bathroom, which is a little bit older, if you've got dingy appliances, this stuff can be really difficult to clean. Sometimes it's so far gone you can't clean it. It's kind of like your car. Sometimes it pays to repair. Sometimes you just got to get a new one. And sometimes you just got to replace it. And that may be the case, and you can get one of those tub-to-shower conversions or an entire bathroom remodel. Work with someone local, like One Bath and Closets. You can start that process with a free consultation at onebathandclosets.com. It's online, onebathandclosets.com.
This is the Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Rouse's Supermarkets.
Wrapping up hour number 1 here from Radio Row Super Bowl 59. It's been a blast all week long. Appreciate the folks at LeBear's Baton Rouge for making this possible. And certainly, we got to shout out our folks at Rouse's official supermarket of the New Orleans Saints. If you're looking for a king cake this carnival season, looking for a king cake for the Super Bowl party, king cake's pretty popular at Super Bowl parties. Get on by Rouse's. They're going to bake 600,000 of them this carnival season. 600,000. So whether you're looking for the standard cinnamon, whether you're looking for the cream cheese filled, strawberry, blueberry, whatever the case may be, they've got them at your local Rouse's. And if you're in South Louisiana all the way to Gulf Shores, you've got a local Rouse's location. So if you're looking for a king cake, get on by Rouse's. We appreciate them for bringing you our Thursday shows each and every week. here's the deal. And I feel like I'll just, come clean on this whole thing because, if you were here on Monday, we teased Kurt Schilling 5 times and never had him. If you've been here today, we've teased Adam Devine 3 times, and he's still not here. The way this works is there are literally hundreds of sets in this room. And these folks do interviews for hours and hours and hours. And sometimes they're kept on a strict schedule by their handlers. Sometimes things get a little out of whack and they get a little bit late. So we've got things booked and they're set hours in advance, and sometimes it works out and sometimes you just got to kind of adapt on the fly. So I'm hopeful that Adam sits down here pretty shortly. That may happen. It may not. I promise I'm not just making stuff up. So you'll come back at the other side of the break when I start to tease things. It's just a very fluid situation. You got to handle it. But it honestly beats being in the studio. It's a lot of fun to kind of watch all this unfold. So hopefully we get to Adam, and hopefully Lorenzo Neal is here in 15 minutes, and we'll just kind of roll with the punches for the next hour and 15 minutes as they roll towards us. I wanted to spend some time talking about Jalen Hurts, though, because I haven't talked a ton about this Super Bowl specifically. And Jalen Hurts is someone that we have watched since he was a freshman in college. If you're in this market and you're paying attention to me, you're probably an LSU person, an SEC football follower, and you watched Jalen Hurts start for Alabama early on in his career. He won that job and became the first true freshman starting quarterback at Alabama in 32 years once he stole that job from Blake Barnett. He started the USC game. Barnett did. Hurts played a little bit. Then he took the starting job, and he became a star right out of the chute as a freshman. He threw for 2,700 yards and 23 touchdowns. He ran the ball for 954 yards and 13 touchdowns. He broke the school single-season record for rushing yards by a quarterback. He was really, really good. And I think the game that a lot of people will remember was against LSU when they couldn't score. Dave Aranda's team did an awesome job of corralling him, and we went to the fourth quarter in a scoreless ball game. And they made the play to win it. Hurts ran it up the middle, and LSU couldn't score if they had 5 weeks to play that day. And from there, you thought he was going to have a long career as Alabama's starting quarterback and guy that could win the Heisman Trophy and continue to stock Nick Saban's trophy shelves with championships. Well, you know the story that he gets replaced by Tua in a championship game where he wasn't playing well, and Tua throws the championship-winning pass to Devontae Smith, and at that point he's kind of lost a job. And he didn't leave immediately. He stayed. And then you get to the SEC championship game, and Jalen Hurts has got to come in and play. And he plays great, and they win the game, and he wins the MVP, and then the job's handed right back to Tua. So at that point, Jalen Hurts says, okay, I'm going to move on, and he goes to Oklahoma. And we, of course, ran into him again there, where LSU is going on that historic run in 2019, and you see them in the semifinal. And nobody knows what Jalen Hurts did that day because Joe Burrow and Justin Jefferson put on a freaking show. But Jalen Hurts acquitted himself okay against what was at that point a really good defense. You can talk about the Ole Miss game all you want with that defense. You can try to malign them based on Vanderbilt scoring a lot of points, but the fact is that defense had a ton of pros on it, and Jalen Hurts played okay in that game. And for Lincoln Riley's offense, he put together ridiculous season that got overshadowed by how incredible Joe Burrow was. You look at his career, his year at Oklahoma. He threw for 3,851 yards and 32 touchdowns. And then he ran it for 1,300 more yards and 20 touchdowns. Those are Tim Tebow-style numbers that Jalen Hurts was putting up in his year at Oklahoma. But they got absolutely annihilated by the greatest team any of us have ever seen. So everybody takes his career and is like, well, whatever, they weren't that good. And I'll be completely honest, I couldn't believe the Eagles drafted him. Because I was like, this guy, he got benched at Bama. He beat up on the Big 12. They don't play any defense. He ran into LSU, got beat by 1,000. Why are you drafting this guy? And it turns out, they've done an incredible job of taking Jalen Hurts' skill set, which is amazing. He's big, he's physical, he's fast, he's got a good arm, he's got a great head on his shoulders, and they've tailored an offense to him. And while he was good with the Kenneth Gainwell, Sanders backfield, now you put a 2,000-yard rusher back there, and he's even more difficult to deal with. And everyone's going to look back 2 years ago at the fumble and not at the fact that he was just awesome in the first half of that game. But he's got a chance to kind of reshape his legacy. And I do think the more interesting piece to this game is Mahomes and Reed chasing history. That, to me, is a more interesting storyline than Jalen Hurts. But I do think Jalen Hurts' rise to this point has absolutely been worth talking about and is a good story. I just don't find it the most amazing because I think that we're watching, and I know that we're watching history on the other sideline. But this is a big day for Jalen Hurts on Sunday because these chances don't come around that often. You can ask Marino, you can ask Breeze, you can ask Aaron Rodgers, you can ask Ben Roethlisberger, you can ask Eli Manning. Any of those quarterbacks, none of them played in 3, 4, 5 Super Bowls like Mahomes does and Brady does, and Manning got to 3, Peyton. But sometimes this is your only bite at the apple. It's your only chance to be the guy. It's your only chance to carve that part of your legacy in. And we don't know if Jalen Hurts will ever get back. Ask Lamar Jackson about playing in Super Bowls. Exactly. We don't know that Joe Burrow's getting back. I hope so. Be awesome. Jaden Daniels isn't guaranteed to make a Super Bowl. So when you talk about Brady and you talk about Mahomes, it's just a different discussion. But Jalen Hurts can go from that guy who got benched at Alabama, who wasn't good enough at Oklahoma to win anything of significance, who screwed up and fumbled in the Super Bowl. Like, nobody speaks in historic terms about Donovan McNabb. It's the same team, but he was in the NFC Championship game all the time, and he got to one Super Bowl, and T.O. had a broken leg. And, like, you think of Donovan McNabb as a good quarterback who Andy Reid had, who was on the soup commercials, but you don't think of him in terms as a Super Bowl champion. And that's what Jalen Hurts has an opportunity to kind of reshape the way we think about him. He's not an MVP at this point, but he's really good, and he can elevate himself. I don't have a rooting interest in this, but I do have an interest from a coverage perspective in the fact that we have been paying attention to Jalen Hurts since he entered the spotlight is fascinating to me. Patrick Mahomes played his college football in anonymity and then got to the NFL and sat on the bench for a year. So we haven't known him as long. Like Hurts, it's been, for us, it's just been in the spotlight. And I think that he's got a real chance to do something special on Sunday. And I'm leaning on Thursday. I very much reserve the right to change my opinion over the next 24 hours. I'm leaning Philly right now, and that may seem stupid, but that offensive line is good, and those weapons are ridiculous, and that defensive front is awesome and good enough to disrupt Patrick Mahomes, and they got some guys in the back end of that secondary that can make some plays. Bond's been as good as anybody in the middle. I've heard it a million times. You're foolish to bet against the Chiefs. You're silly if you look the other way. You're trying to be the smartest guy in the room if you do that. I mean, you look at this Philly team, they've been pretty good. And they lost a game with Kenny Pickett playing quarterback to the Commanders. But when Hurts is out there, they're pretty damn good. And he's going to be out there at least to start things on Sunday. And I'm not here to tell you I'm pulling for Jalen Hurts. But it's an interesting storyline in this game, and I think a guy that can completely rewrite his legacy over the course of 4 hours here in New Orleans, or it could kind of be the same as the guy who was pretty good but never quite good enough. He was pretty good at Alabama, never quite good enough, lost his job. Pretty good at Oklahoma, not quite good enough to do anything significant in the postseason. Pretty good in the NFL regular season, not quite good enough to get over the hump against Mahomes. All of a sudden, you go from pretty good, not quite good enough, to, oh, that's a champ. That dude's for real. Cool stuff, I think. We're here on Radio Row for Super Bowl 59, brought to you by the folks at LeBear's Baton Rouge. Be a great time to get on by LeBear's on Sunday to watch the Super Bowl. I'll be at LeBear's coming up on Sunday from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Kickoff's at 5:30, so I'm going to head on home to watch the action. But I'll be there beforehand. There'll be some great food and drinks on hand, a lot of great televisions. There'll be some college hoop on. I may, and just hide your excitement, I may get them to put the Waste Management Open on Sunday on one of the smaller TVs. Just saying. But I'll be there from 3 to 5, so if you're looking for something to do to get ready for the Super Bowl, looking for a place to watch the Super Bowl, LeBear's is an awesome spot inside ESPN Bet. That's where I'll be from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock coming up on Sunday. That's a fast-moving first hour. Even though it was kind of jumbled based on what we got and who we were looking for and who did come and who didn't come, it moved really quickly. We opened up the hour talking about LSU basketball. They fall by 19 in Athens last night in a completely disastrous performance on both sides of the ball. I gave my thoughts on it. Also got a story up on LouisianaSports.net about that. Then in the second segment, spent some time talking about the Brian Kelly press conference and Greg Brooks and his statements on that. Then Brooke Choulet from she's a sports psychiatrist, was with us, kind of talking about the work that she's done with some professional athletes on the mental health side of things, which is kind of a new frontier, even newer than I thought in talking to her. You can catch all that on demand wherever you find your sound. We'll come back. Be a fast-moving hour number 2 coming up next from Radio Row.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge, genesisofbatonrouge.com is that website. Every car that is on the lot is online at genesisofbatonrouge.com. How's a 100,000-mile warranty sound like? What's a 10-year warranty sound like to you? Just part of the Genesis experience. How about complimentary maintenance for 3 years on your new purchase? You can make that happen. It can be valet maintenance, meaning you don't even have to really lift a finger. You do have to pick up your phone. You got to call them and say, hey, I need some maintenance done. They'll come get your car. They'll leave you with a vehicle. They'll bring your car back to the dealership. They'll service it, oil change, wipers, air filter, the whole deal. You'll have a car, so you'll be able to get along your day. Then they'll bring your car back, take the loaner, and you got your maintenance done. 3 years complimentary maintenance. Check them out online at Mercedes at genesisofbatonrouge.com. It's Genesis of Baton Rouge. You can find them online. It's at genesisofbatonrouge.com.